The coach cracked sideways on the mountain road, and Charlotte Merritt was already moving before the screaming started. The wheel had caught a stone the size of a fist, and the world went with it. Her shoulder hit the seat back, then the door. The horses shrieked. That thin, glass-breaking sound horses make when the earth tilts under them. And the coachman's whip snapped once, and did not snap again. Hawthorn bloomed white along the cliff path, and the petals came down in a sudden drift as the coach slewed through them, as if the mountain were trying to soften its own violence. She shoved the door open with her boot and rolled out. The drop on her left was 40 feet of broken rock. The coach teetered on 2 wheels, its axle groaning. Beneath the near horse, pinned by the fallen shaft, a boy in a stable coat was trying to breathe and failing. 14, maybe 15. His eyes were open and steady on hers, and he did not scream, which was worse than if he had. "Don't move," Charlotte said, and her voice came out like her father's, low, flat, the voice he used when a mare was falling wrong. She stepped to the horse's head. The animal was trembling and trying to stand. Another heave, and it would roll the shaft straight through the boy's ribs. She caught the bridle in both hands. "Steady, steady, you know me. You don't, but you know my voice. Steady." She dropped to one knee and laid her cheek against the horse's muzzle. The mare's breath was hot and ragged. The iron of the bit was slick. Somewhere behind her, the coachman groaned and began to curse in a voice that meant he was not the one dying. "Listen," she told the mare. "Listen, listen, listen." The horse stilled. Charlotte did not turn her head. "Boy, can you hear me?" "Yes, miss." "Good. I'm going to count to 3. On 3, I pull the shaft. You slide. Do not try to stand. You slide until you are clear. Then you lie on your back and you count hawthorn petals until I come for you. Do you understand?" "Yes, miss." 1. The mare's ear flicked. 2. She set her boot against the splintered wood. 3. She heaved. Her arms burned. The shaft lifted perhaps an inch. Enough. The boy twisted and slid and was out from under, and the mare scrambled up and away, and the whole coach settled at last into the ditch with a long, disappointed sigh. Charlotte sat down hard in the wet grass and discovered she was shaking. She had 70 seconds before the hoofbeats resolved into a rider. He came at a gallop along the high road, cut through the hawthorn gap, and brought his horse down from full speed to a stop in the space of 3 strides. Charlotte had never seen anyone ride like that outside a cavalry parade. He swung down before the animal had finished its last step. Tall. She noticed that first, because she had to tilt her head. Broad across the shoulders in a way that the riding coat could not disguise, and did not try to. Dark chestnut hair cut unfashionably short. A dueling scar above his left brow, pale and clean. Pale grey-blue eyes in a face that had been weathered by more than parlour life. He went to the boy first, not to her. She liked him for that before she liked him for anything else. "Ribs?" he asked the boy. "Bruised, Your Grace, not broke." "Breathe in." The boy breathed. The man's hand rested on his chest. "Again." The boy breathed again. The man nodded once and straightened. Then, and only then, he looked at her. Charlotte was aware, with a sudden prickle of horror, that her skirt was torn to the knee on one side, that there was blood along her temple from where the door had caught her, and that a length of her black hair had come unpinned and was trailing down her shoulder like a flag of surrender. She had lost a glove. Her left hand, bare, still clutched a shred of the mare's bridle. He was silent for a measured interval, long enough for the stable boy to find his feet, long enough for the mare to steady on her own, long enough that Charlotte, who was beginning to understand that this man would not speak until he had something worth saying, found herself straightening her shoulders involuntarily. "You pulled the shaft," he said. "I had to." He considered her. His gaze moved once across her face and did not return. Most women would have run for help. Most women know where the nearest help is. I did not. His mouth moved, not a smile. The corner of it. Your Grace, I think you are meant to say. Heat climbed up her neck. She had learned the form at 8 and deployed it at every social engagement since. Not today. Most women would have run for help, Your Grace. This time it was almost a smile. He reached her in 2 strides and knelt, and Charlotte saw at closer range the thing she had missed at distance. The scar above the brow was old, but his hands, which were examining her temple with unexpected gentleness, were working hands, calloused across the palm, dark under the nails where dark will not wash out. A gentleman who did his own work then, or a gentleman who had been doing someone else's. Head wounds bleed, he said. This one looks worse than it is. I am going to touch your jaw. Tell me if it catches. He pressed the bone carefully. Nothing caught. He pressed the collarbone. Nothing caught. Arms up, he said. She raised them. He laid 2 fingers against the inside of her wrist, found her pulse, and held it. The heat of his hand travelled the length of her arm in a single pulse beat, and then travelled back. Charlotte, who had been kneeling beside a half-crushed stable boy 90 seconds earlier, discovered that her cheeks were burning. Strong pulse, he said. Fast. I have been exerting myself, Your Grace. He released her wrist. He stood, held out a hand, and she took it without thinking, and he lifted her to her feet as if she weighed nothing, which she did not. Charlotte Merritt was 5'9" and bred on a working stable. She had never been lifted by anyone. They stood close enough that she could smell the clean of his linen, starch, lavender soap, the faintest trace of horse. A gentleman, then, who kept his own tack. One more fact filed without her permission. Your carriage is ruined, he observed. Yes. Your coachman is cursing, which I take as a favorable medical sign. A laugh tried to rise in her throat. She swallowed it. It was not the moment. Yes. And you are going. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She had been going, in fact, to the ancestral seat of House Ashmir, to attend a ball given by the Duke of Ashmir in honor of her sister Evelyn, to whom he was not quite promised. She had been going to wear her sister's gown, answer to her sister's name, and spend one evening buying her sister time to elope with a country vicar in the next valley. She had not been going to meet the Duke of Ashmir on a mountain road with her hair in her face and a stable boy's blood on her glove. And she was now, she realized, being asked her destination by a man who had already been called Your Grace by his own stable boy. Ashmir, she said. His face did not change. He was too well trained for that. But something in his eyes sharpened, the look of a man who had just made a calculation and disliked the result. You are expected. I am expected. You are Lady Evelyn Merritt. Charlotte looked at him. She thought about the sister who had wept in her arms at dawn, who had said, I cannot, I cannot, I cannot, who had pressed a lark-graved signet into her palm and whispered, Buy me a week, Lottie, just a week. She thought about the mountain road behind her. She thought about the look on this man's face when he had knelt beside the boy. Yes, she said. I am Evelyn. It was the first lie she had ever told that mattered. Then it appears, Lady Evelyn, that I am your host. He handed her up onto his horse before she knew what was happening, seated her across the saddlebow as if he had done it 1,000 times, which he had not, because no gentleman of her acquaintance would have dared. He gave swift instructions to a servant who had come up behind him. The boy was to ride to the village surgeon. The coachman was to follow with the luggage. The mare was to be walked slowly to Ashmir. Then he swung up behind her in a single fluid motion, and the whole animal's frame adjusted to the additional weight without breaking pace. She felt his arm come around her to take the reins. It did not touch her waist. It did not need to. She was aware of the heat of his chest at her back, the precise distance he kept, and the fact that the entire mountain for a moment smelled only of hawthorn. 5 miles, he said. Do not faint. I do not faint, Your Grace. No, he said, and this time he did smile. She could hear it in his voice, even though she could not see his face. I suspect you do not. The Ashmir seat stood at the head of a long, green valley, its grey stone rising out of the new spring like something the mountain itself had pushed up in the night. Charlotte had expected grandeur. She had not expected the scaffolding on the east wing, the mud tracked across the forecourt, or the army of workmen in shirt-sleeves mortaring a wall at the base of the south tower. A duke's estate under active restoration. A duke who, she was beginning to understand, supervised it himself. He swung down first and lifted her down, and his hands at her waist did something she chose not to examine. Lady Evelyn will require hot water, clean linen, and an hour, he said to a hovering housekeeper. Her trunk will follow within the hour. I do not have a trunk, Charlotte said. You will by evening. Whatever you need, send word. Mrs. Halloway will manage it. He looked at her once more. A long look, neither gallant nor suggestive, simply assessing, and then bowed precisely and strode across the forecourt toward a foreman who had been waiting for him with a ledger. Charlotte watched him go. The foreman said something. The Duke said something back. The ledger opened, closed, opened again. He pointed at something on the south tower, and the foreman nodded and began to shout at a man on the scaffolding. Mrs. Halloway said, "This way, my lady." Charlotte followed her up a staircase she had never climbed, through corridors she did not know, into a room at the end of a long gallery where a fire was already laid and a bath was already steaming, and she sat down on the edge of a canopied bed that had probably stood in that place for 200 years. She had 6 hours until the ball. She had her sister's borrowed name and a signet ring carved with a bird that was not hers. She had a duke downstairs who had already, in the space of half an hour, unsettled her more than any man in 6 London seasons. She took off her torn gown and stepped into the bath and thought, one night. Buy her 1 night. Get out clean. Ashmir's ballroom took up the whole of the restored west wing. Charlotte had heard of it. Everyone in 3 counties had heard of it. A 100-foot gallery with mirrors along one long side and mullioned windows along the other, the pair of them throwing candlelight across an inlaid floor that the current Duke's grandfather had won at cards and his father had lost and then won back. Tonight the windows showed the mountain, black against a violet sky, the snow line still visible above the tree line, the hawthorn lit up silver white by moonrise. The mirrors showed the guests, multiplied. Charlotte entered in her sister's emerald silk. The gown had been cut for Evelyn and fit Charlotte imperfectly. Her shoulders were a half-inch broader, her height a half-inch greater. But the colour was right. The Merritt twins shared a colouring that hostesses had been sighing over for a decade. Raven black hair, pale ivory skin, clear grey eyes that read as lamplit water in the right light. Even their mother could not tell them apart in the dusk. Charlotte had powdered her temple, where the cut was still angry, pinned her hair high to hide the unpinned length, slid on the lark signet ring, and practiced her sister's quieter laugh for 20 minutes in front of a mirror. The name Lady Evelyn Merritt rolled down the ballroom ahead of her like a wave. Heads turned. She had expected that. What she had not expected was the silence. The Duke of Ashmir was standing at the far end of the gallery in black. Formal black. Immaculate black. The kind of tailoring that announces a man is not interested in being looked at, but that you will look anyway. He was speaking to an older woman in diamonds, and he was half-turned, and the moment she entered, he stopped speaking. He looked at her. It was not a long look. It was perhaps 2 seconds. But the entire room understood it. Charlotte felt her pulse jump in a traitorous way and thought, with a sudden, appalling clarity, He is going to cross this room, and he is going to ask me to dance. And every person in this ballroom is going to watch him do it. And I am going to say yes. He crossed the room. He did not hurry. He did not need to. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for a blade, instinctively, without apparent instruction. Lady Evelyn. His voice was lower than she remembered from the mountain road, pitched for one listener in a crowd of 300. Charlotte dropped into the curtsy she had practiced, half an inch too low for a duke, a quarter inch too deliberate, the precise depth her sister had always performed at court. Your Grace. Are you recovered? She felt the weight of the gallery at her back, of 100 pairs of eyes reading every small thing she did. Her answer came with the half-smile her sister had lent her, along with the gown. From the road, entirely. From the stairs, partially. I was lost 3 times. The older woman in diamonds, Lady Something, an aunt by marriage, Charlotte suspected, glided tactfully aside, and a pocket of silence opened around the two of them in the middle of the moving room. This house is cruel to strangers. I apologize. It is cruel to its inhabitants as well, I suspect. His mouth did that thing again. Not a smile. The corner. Behind him, somewhere past his shoulder, the quartet finished tuning with a single long chord that seemed to settle the chandeliers. I had intended, he said, to ask you for the supper dance. I am reconsidering. Charlotte made herself breathe. Oh? I find that I would prefer the first. A quartet had begun, somewhere up the gallery, the opening bars of something slow and old, a mountain ballad his grandfather had probably danced to in this same room. He held out his hand, and Charlotte, who had been bred for London drawing rooms and provincial soirees, but had never danced in a gallery with walls that remembered coronations, placed her gloved fingers over his. His palm settled at her waist. Not heavy, merely present, in a way that a less observant man would have been unable to manage, and a more familiar one would have done by accident. The heat of it came through Evelyn's emerald silk in a long, slow pulse. Tell me, he said, as they moved into the figure, is head wound recovery improved by waltzing? Charlotte concentrated on her left foot. The left foot had, over 6 London seasons, proven to be the unreliable one. It is worsened, I believe. Are you unwell, my lady? The chandelier overhead wheeled slowly through the steps of the dance, and the light caught the hawthorn petal still hidden at her hem. She did not look down. I am determinedly well, Your Grace. It is a point of family pride. He offered, with a courtier's lightness, that determined wellness was evidently a merit trait, and she heard the echo in her own answer before she gave it, which made her repeat the phrase back to him exactly, which pleased him, which troubled her. Then he observed, very mildly, that he had understood her sister to share the trait. Charlotte nearly missed her step. She did not miss it. She was too well trained. But the muscles of her hand contracted against his palm, and his eyes, pale, attentive, noticing everything, marked the reaction without blinking. She felt the mistake register in him the way a rider feels a stone catch under a hoof. Her sister, she said carefully, was less determined than she was, in most things. He let the answer sit between them for a measure, weighed it without turning his head, and then, equally carefully, invited her to elaborate, an invitation she did not accept. They turned. The room turned with them. The mirrors along the gallery wall flashed past in a long, lit procession of strangers who, doubled, became a crowd twice as watchful as the one actually present. Forgive me, he said, his voice gone quiet under the music, if this is indelicate. I was given to understand that you and your sister were more alike than most twins. Her heart, which had behaved itself in the mountain road and on the stairs and in the bath, had decided, here, in front of 400 candles and the doubled ghosts of everyone else, to misbehave spectacularly. She answered by rote, In appearance, perhaps. In temperament, not at all. Which of you is the horsewoman? A long heartbeat. The music lifted. He drew her through a turn that put her back, briefly, to the full length of the gallery, and the candles swam. I am, she said, before she could think better. I thought as much, he replied, and the thing was done. A plain sentence she could not take back, set between them like a coin she had passed across a table to a man who already knew it was gold. They turned again. Candlelight slid across his shoulder and lit the line of his jaw. The ballad his grandfather had danced to was apparently a long one. She had already lost count of the bars remaining. She was aware of her own pulse in 3 places: at the base of her throat, at her right temple where the cut was, and at the calloused inner line of her gloved hand where his palm rested. He let a measure pass, then a second. When he spoke again, it was so quietly that she felt it in her sternum before her ears heard it. Lady Evelyn, I have reason to believe that we have met before. Her mouth went dry. The mirrors, obligingly, showed her nothing of it. Her answer came out steady. She could be proud of that much, at least. Have we? About 6 hours ago, on a mountain road. You were pulling a shaft off a stable boy. She did not miss the next step either, but she felt the room tilt anyway. The mirrors showed a woman in green silk, perfectly composed, dancing with the Duke. They did not show the woman who was, underneath, calculating every route out of the ballroom. Your Grace, she said carefully, if you are suggesting, I am suggesting nothing. I am observing. There is a cut at your temple that has been powdered but not disguised. Your dancing is a quarter beat ahead of the violin, which suggests a body that has been running on crisis for some hours. And, forgive me, there is still hawthorn caught in the lace at your hem. She looked down. There was, indeed, a tiny spray of hawthorn petals caught in the embroidery at her ankle. When she looked up again, he was watching her with an expression she could not categorize, neither triumphant, nor cruel, nor even amused. Something quieter, something that had the shape of, I have been waiting all my life to meet someone who would do what you did today. And that could not possibly be what he meant, because they had known each other for 6 hours. A beat of music. 2. Her fingers, in their long white glove, had gone cold against his palm, and she knew without looking that he could feel it. She said his title. He answered with hers. Lady Evelyn, precisely and deliberately, so the name had the weight of a promise made to someone else. Then she asked, quiet enough that only he could hear it over the quartet, whether she was to be unmasked in his ballroom. No, he said. He drew her fractionally closer, as the figure required, and the heat of his chest was a footmark from her shoulder. You are to finish this dance, and then you are to tell me, privately, on my terms, whatever it is that a woman who pulls a coach shaft off a stable boy wishes to conceal from the man who lifted her onto his horse. I ask only that, nothing more tonight. She looked at him, directly, the way no well-bred young lady was supposed to look at a duke in his own ballroom, and she saw a man who had decided something about her in the space of 6 hours, and intended to see it through. Oh, Evie, she thought. Oh, you idiot. After the dance, she said, and the agreement was sealed with the single small nod he gave her in return. They finished the dance. Ashmir's ballroom, unaware, watched the Duke of Ashmir fall, or come perilously close to falling, for a woman he had just met. The mirrors doubled them. The candles stretched their shadows across the inlaid floor. The mountain outside held its breath behind the windows, hawthorn silver under a rising moon. A musician in the quartet, a violinist whose granduncle had played at the old Duke's wedding, kept his bow steady, even while he watched the Duke dance with a woman who, he would tell his son 30 years later, could only be described as the one. He was unaware she had sent her twin in her place. He was only aware that he could not look away. She did not give him his private audience that night. She gave him 15 minutes in a candle-lit alcove off the gallery, long enough to apologize for Lady Evelyn's sudden headache and withdraw to bed, and long enough to see, in his eyes, that he had noted her evasion and was choosing, for now, to permit it. The alcove was a narrow half-moon of carved oak, lit by a single branch of candles, and cool against the warmth of the gallery. 300 years of previous Ashmirs had done whatever Ashmirs did in this alcove, and the walls carried a peculiar listening quality that no drawing-room in England seemed to quite manage. He stood with his hand braced flat against the wood panelling above her head. He did not look at her like a suitor. He looked at her like a man who had, on a mountain road that morning, identified a horse worth keeping. "Tomorrow," he said. "Ride with me. 8 o'clock. "I do not ride before breakfast, Your Grace." "Then you will ride for breakfast. There is a place 2 miles up the valley where the cook sends hot bread." A very small, very tired corner of Charlotte's mouth turned up, against her own orders. "You bribe guests with pastries." "I bribe only the ones worth bribing." She went up to bed and did not sleep. She lay in the canopied 4-poster in a borrowed nightgown and listened to the house settle around her, the scaffolding creaking as the wind shifted, the last of the ball guests taking carriages down the valley, Mrs. Halloway giving quiet orders to a scullery maid about tomorrow's bread. Somewhere in the house, a duke was sitting up late in a study, she suspected, with a ledger and a brandy, thinking about her. And somewhere, 3 valleys to the south, her twin sister was, by now, married, or running. Either way, Evelyn would not be stopped, and Charlotte's assignment had been simple. Buy her a week. 8 days, Charlotte thought. I have 6 more days to get through. Then Evelyn sends word, and I vanish, and the Duke of Ashmir will have the decency to look the other way when his almost betrothed disappears from his house like a reasonable woman. It was a solid plan. She rode with him at 8 o'clock. He was waiting in the yard with 2 horses, one of them a black mare with a white star and a temper visible from 15 paces. Charlotte walked straight to it. "She bites," he said. "She bites people who surprise her." Charlotte ran a palm down the mare's neck. The mare snorted once and allowed it. The Duke, watching, did not comment, but Charlotte saw his mouth do the thing again. They rode out of the courtyard at a walk, into a morning so full of hawthorn scent that the air itself seemed white. The valley opened in front of them, mist rising off a stream, new grass, lambs still too unsteady to run from the sound of hooves. Charlotte forgot, for 3 minutes, to be anyone but herself. She let the black mare choose her pace, and the mare chose well. A long, swinging walk that set the pace of their own 2 animals into a rhythm Charlotte had not had since childhood. She watched a kestrel hang above the stream, and the mare's ears cocked to listen for the bird. And the Duke of Ashmir, beside her on the larger bay, said nothing. For a long stretch of road, it was possible to believe that the week in front of her would unfold no differently from the one she had planned. It was the kestrel that betrayed her. When it plunged, she leaned forward instinctively, and her thighs tightened on the mare's flanks in the precise signal of a woman who had, since she was small, ridden to hawks. She felt him see it. She felt it in the small adjustment of his own posture, the way a man in the card game marks one card. "Your sister rides, I take it," he said. "She rides creditably." "That is an interesting answer, Lady Evelyn." She had practiced this answer in front of the mirror. It came out smoother than she feared, and still did not sound right. "My sister and I were raised on the same stables. Our father taught us both. She rides creditably. She caught herself. "I have always ridden more than she has." "Your hands on that mare were not more hands." She looked at the road ahead. "Your Grace." "Yes?" "If you intend to cross-examine me for 5 miles, I would prefer we trot." "As you wish." They trotted. The mountain opened up. The stream bent. The Duke of Ashmir, who apparently had not been accused of a lie this directly since he had become Duke of Ashmir, slid her a look of such quiet appreciation that Charlotte felt it all the way down to the soles of her riding boots. She kept her eyes on the road. The mountain road was narrow here, and a man who could take a runaway gallop to a stop in 3 strides did not, one gathered, forgive inattention. He took her, as promised, to a cottage set at the valley bend. It was a tenant's cottage, with a slate roof and a kitchen garden bordered in mint. The woman who came out of it, a broad-shouldered farmer's wife with flour on her forearms, greeted the Duke by his first name, and Charlotte by a deep, welcoming curtsy that was clearly meant for whichever grand lady the Duke had seen fit to bring. The woman did not ask for the lady's name. Charlotte understood, with a small, hot pinch of discomfort, that in this valley the Duke's introduction was all that was needed, and that her failure to offer her own name had already been noted and politely set aside. She sat down on the bench and put her hands flat on her knees to hide the tremor. The woman brought them bread, fresh butter, and strong tea in tin cups, and set them outside on a bench at the edge of a bluebell field. The bluebells had just begun. They were ankle-deep and moving in a wind Charlotte could not feel. Somewhere in the cottage, a kettle hissed a second time. A goat bleated behind a low stone wall. A lamb answered, confused about the difference. He did not question her at breakfast. He asked her about horses, about her father's stables. She gave him a truthful answer, because her father's stables were Merritt stables, and she was a Merritt, technically either way. About the mare she had calmed at the road. She gave him a truthful answer. About whether Merritt women had always handled their own horses. She said, some of us have. Your sister does not. My sister is entitled to her own preferences, Your Grace. Evidently. He watched her take the last bite of bread. His eyes were on her mouth, and she was distantly aware that no man had watched her eat in 6 London seasons without her noticing what it did to him. This one she could not read. This one was doing something with his silence that was worse than any compliment. Lady Evelyn. Your Grace. He set down his tin cup. The wind moved across the bluebells, and for a long moment there was no sound but the soft, collective hiss of flowers bending. When you are finished with your breakfast, I would like to show you the south stables. They are in a condition that would distress a horsewoman. I would value your opinion. She felt the trap closing gently around her. She set down her bread. I am not a... Your sister is not a horsewoman. The woman currently eating my bread is absolutely a horsewoman. A silence. You are not, Charlotte said slowly, the man I was led to expect. What were you led to expect? A duke. Ah, I am that. But I am also, as you have observed, a man who prefers not to be lied to, even beautifully, even for plausible reasons. The air between them tightened. You have not told me the whole truth. I am not asking for it today. I am telling you that I know it is there. You may keep it as long as you need to. He set down his tin cup. I ask only one thing. What? Do not lie to me about something that matters. I can survive a polite fiction. I cannot survive a betrayal. Charlotte felt her throat close. Your Grace, she said, I have known you 22 hours. Yes. What makes you think I am worth such a pact? He looked at her across the bench, across the bluebells, across the long morning already full of birds. I have been looking, he said quite simply, for a woman who could pull a shaft off a stable boy and still eat bread with her fingers. I did not think I would find one. I certainly did not think I would find one at a ball. He stood and held out his hand. The south stables. She took his hand, and the moment his fingers closed around hers, she knew, with a clarity that would ruin her for the rest of her life, that she was not going to get out of this in a week. The south stables at Ashmir were, in fact, a disgrace. Charlotte walked the line in silence, and her silence lengthened, and by the time she reached the last box, her silence had a quality that the Duke, walking beside her, hands clasped behind his back, was wise enough not to interrupt. She counted the horses as she went. She could not help it. She had done this since she was 10. And she catalogued them under her breath the way her father had taught her. Coat, age, build, temper. The second-to-last box held a grey gelding whose hip bones stood out under a coat that should have gleamed, and did not. She ran a hand down his flank. The animal flinched, not from pain, but from unfamiliar kindness. The flinch told her more than any ledger would have. She breathed in once, slowly. The air in the stable was wrong. Too thick with mildewed hay on the west side, too thin where fresh bedding had been laid over unremoved dung. A skimmer, she thought. A lazy, confident one, who had been doing it for a season at least. "You have a groom problem," she said at last. "I have a head groom problem. Your head groom has been watering the colts too cold, exercising the 2-year-olds on uneven ground, and, unless I am very much mistaken, skimming oat stock. The big chestnut in the third box has not been fed what his account says he has been fed for at least 3 weeks. Ashmir said nothing. He had stopped walking. His hands, still clasped behind his back, had gone white at the knuckles. "Have your steward pull the feed ledgers," she continued, "and compare against the mill delivery receipts. The discrepancy will be greater than the grooms can collectively account for. It is your head groom." "I will see to it." "Today, Your Grace." "Today." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. They were at the end of the line, half-shadowed, the smell of hay and horse sweet around them. "I should not," she said, "be giving you estate advice." "No, you should not. Lady Evelyn Merritt would not." Do not finish that sentence." She looked at him. He was not looking at her with reproach. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who had been given a gift he had not expected to receive in his lifetime, and intended to be exceptionally careful with it. "Today," he said, "I learned that my head groom is a thief. Tomorrow, perhaps, I will learn other things. I am patient. I am, by temperament, not an easy man to deceive. But I can be an exceptionally patient one when the deception appears to be in the service of something I will respect when I see it." "Your Grace." "Yes?" "I am going to make this enormously worse for both of us before it becomes better." He smiled for the first time, a full smile, a startling thing because it transformed his face from granite into something dangerous in an entirely different register. "I suspected as much," he said. "Shall we continue?" The second day, Charlotte sat through a long luncheon with Ashmir's uncle, a reedy, anxious man who had travelled up from London on the morning coach and who spent the meal watching his nephew the way a man might watch a beloved but fragile instrument under an apprentice's hands. The uncle's name was Gerald Farthingale. Charlotte understood immediately, from the way he tasted each new dish before committing to swallowing it, that this was a man who had lived an entire life by waiting to see what other people thought first. She gave him Evelyn's quieter smile, and a version of Evelyn's conversation, and he accepted it, without ever quite relaxing. She was, she realized, being inspected. The uncle had come up from London to confirm that the young woman his nephew had been writing about, in vague terms, was acceptable. He left, 3 hours later, with an expression that suggested he was unconvinced, but too well-bred to say so to Patrick's face. And Charlotte stood at the window of the east drawing-room and watched his carriage rattle down the valley road, with an odd, hollow feeling under her breastbone. The carriage had been the same make as her own wrecked one. She had noticed. She had counted the horses. That afternoon, she went to the south stables alone and fired nothing at the head groom because she had no authority to. She stood in the shadow of the feed-room door and watched him weigh out the oat ration for the chestnut in the third box. He shorted it by 1.5 pounds. He did it smoothly. He did it with the unconscious grace of a man who had been doing it so long he had forgotten it was theft. Charlotte went back to the house and did not tell Patrick. Not yet. It was not her stable. It was not her problem. She only walked the east garden for an hour afterward, turning the problem in her mind the way her father had taught her to turn a bent shoe in a forge, looking at it from every angle. And by the time the dressing bell rang for supper, she had understood, quietly, that she was no longer in a position to not care. The third day, the day Patrick pulled the foal, had begun in a downpour that the servants said was only to be expected in a late spring in the mountains. The weather cleared by 10. The mare in the third loose box went into labor at 11. By noon, Patrick was in his shirt sleeves beside the mare's flank, with Charlotte holding the mare's head. And for the first time since she had arrived at Ashmir, Charlotte had not been thinking about the lark ring on her finger. The foal came out in a rush of steam and new life, and Patrick had looked up at her across the length of the mare's body and laughed. Not quite a laugh, more of a breath. And Charlotte, her hand on a mare's muzzle and her heart lodged firmly in her throat, had understood with absolute clarity that she had passed the point at which she could leave Ashmir without bleeding on the way out. By the fourth day, Charlotte was in trouble. The trouble was not that her deception was fraying. The deception was holding. Mrs. Halloway and the senior footman had both taken Lady Evelyn at her word. The village had seen her on horseback, but not near enough to notice any difference. And the stable boy from the road, a cheerful lad named Tom, recovering well under a village surgeon's care, had been told by his mother, in Charlotte's hearing, that the lady who had pulled the shaft off him was Lady Evelyn, and you will remember her in your prayers forever, you will. Tom had agreed solemnly. Charlotte had ducked into the dispensary, handed over 6 guineas and a jar of honey from the Ashmir kitchen, and escaped. No, the trouble was different. The trouble was that she wanted to stay. She wanted, on the morning of the 4th day, to drink her tea at the long table in the east morning room and argue with the Duke of Ashmir about whether the front pasture should be given over to lambing or to racehorses, the way they had argued the previous morning and the morning before. She wanted to stand in the south stable on the 3rd day and watch him, coat off, sleeves rolled, the muscles of his forearms lit gold by the hay-door light, pull a foal into the world while she held the mare's head and murmured nonsense into its ear. She wanted the moment on the 3rd afternoon when he had put a hand under her elbow to help her down a slope, and his thumb had grazed the inside of her wrist and lingered there for a beat longer than the slope required. She wanted him, and she could not have him, because she was Charlotte, and he thought he was courting Evelyn, and somewhere in the next valley Evelyn was presumably writing the letter that would set Charlotte free, and free meant, it had to mean, leaving. She took her grief, as she had been taught, to horses. She was in the south paddock at dawn on the 4th morning, bareheaded, her hair in a plait down her back, working a difficult 2-year-old on a long rein, when she heard him come to the fence. She did not turn. She worked the animal 2 full circuits before she acknowledged him. "You are up early, Your Grace." "So are you, Lady Evelyn." The 2-year-old turned. The bluebells behind the paddock were brighter this morning than yesterday. The valley was thick with lark song. She listened to the soft creak of the rein in her hand. The 2-year-old was listening to her now. She had earned that much in 8 minutes. And the silence between herself and the man on the fence had begun to develop a texture she was not sure she could bear much longer. At last, she stopped the 2-year-old with a quiet tsk and a low phrase her father used on nervous horses. The animal stood, sides heaving softly. Charlotte laid her palm against the warm neck and did not turn her head. She told him, to the mountain air, that there was a letter at the house for her, that the footman had brought it in an hour ago, that he had not opened it, that he knew, of course, that it was not his letter to open. He answered, quietly, that he had seen it. She worked the 2-year-old another circuit. He waited. Patience, she was beginning to understand, was a weapon he wielded like other men wielded swords. The lark song in the hawthorn had thickened as the light climbed the valley. Her own shadow, long in the wet grass, moved with the horse. "It is from my sister," she said. A low, from his side of the fence. Agreement, acknowledgement, an almost silent permission to continue. The rein creaked. She kept her hand steady. She stood for a moment with her cheek pressed to the warm neck of a creature who had no opinions on human deception, and drew one breath that tasted of horse and damp wool and new grass. "She writes to say—" Charlotte's voice went rough. She steadied it. "She writes to say that she is married to a vicar in the next county." A long silence. The mare's ear flicked at a lark overhead. Somewhere beyond the paddock, a wagon rolled down the valley road, harness fittings chiming. "How long ago?" he asked, quiet. 4 days. The day I arrived here." Ah. He did not say more. He did not have to. Charlotte stopped the horse. She looped the long rein around her hand, and she turned to face him across the paddock fence. She unhooked the long rein from her hand and let it fall. The 2-year-old, sensing a change in the human weather, drifted a polite half-step away and put its head down into the grass. She turned to face the fence. The movement felt like stepping off a low wall, a small, committed drop with nothing to catch her on the other side. "Your Grace." He answered that he had noticed, that she had said "Your Grace" many times in the week. His voice was almost kind. "I am not Evelyn," she said. "I know." She stared at him. The mountain behind him did not move. The only thing that moved in her whole visible world was a single black and white bird, a dipper, probably, from the stream, flickering along the far line of the paddock fence. "I have known," he said, "since the ballroom. I strongly suspected on the mountain road. I was certain by the second breakfast. I permitted the fiction because, as I said 4 days ago, I can survive a polite fiction, and because I wished to see what you would do with it." Her hand tightened on the rein until it cut her. She did not feel it. She heard herself say, flatly, that he had known for 4 days. She heard his quiet answer, 3.5, perhaps, and the silence behind it, which was the silence of a man who had been watching her very carefully and saying nothing for as many hours as there had been hours. "I said a great deal. I said, 'Do not lie to me about anything that matters.' You did not. You lied about a name. You did not lie about whether you are a horsewoman. You did not lie about whether you have read estate ledgers. You did not lie about whether my head groom was a thief. You did not lie when you looked at the south stables and were furious on my behalf. Everything that mattered, you told me." "Your Grace, Charlotte." The name hit her like a slap. She had not told him. He had done the arithmetic himself. Evelyn Merritt's twin, Charlotte Merritt, younger by 6 minutes, signet a lark. Somewhere in the county records room in her mother's old parish, or in the stud book for her father's stables, or in the Merritt family Bible on the hall table of her childhood home. That name and that rank were written, and he had found them. "Yes," she said. Her voice was barely a voice. "Charlotte," he said. "Why?" She wanted to lie. She'd been lying for 4 days, and the reflex was strong. She reached for the easy answer. Evelyn asked, and she did not use it. She was in love, Charlotte said. With a man the family would not have. She had meant to refuse you in person. She lost her courage. She came to me at dawn the day of her elopement and begged me. A week, just a week, to get clear of the county, to give her husband's parish a chance to stand behind her when the scandal came. I said yes, because she is my sister. I came here because I could not stand the thought of your people pulling up the forecourt expecting Lady Evelyn Merritt and finding no one. He said, flat and low, that she had stood in. She agreed, the answer scarcely above a breath. He observed that it had been a risk to her own reputation, and a far greater one to his. She flinched at the grater and said only that she was sorry. He looked at her across the fence, across 4 days of a courtship that had not, by any measure he should have recognized, been a courtship at all. The bluebells nodded. The 2-year-old stamped. Charlotte realized her face was wet and could not remember when it had started. He shifted his weight on the fence. His hands, long, calloused, dark under the nails, tightened on the top rail. Behind her, the 2-year-old snorted softly at a midge. "Do you know," he said, in a voice that was almost conversational, "what I have done in the last 4 days?" "No." "I have fired my head groom, recovered 3 seasons of stolen oats, re-evaluated my entire plan for the south pasture, and begun to redraft my intentions with respect to Lady Evelyn Merritt, who had turned out, against all expectation, to be nothing like the woman my uncle described to me." Her throat worked. "Your uncle described Evelyn?" "My uncle described a well-bred, pleasant, slightly timid young woman who would make an acceptable duchess. I had resigned myself. I had instead spent 4 days with a woman who pulls shafts off stable boys, calls my head groom out in a barn, and lies to me with such tactical delicacy that I almost admired it." "Your Grace." "And now I find that the woman I have been falling for is not, in fact, the woman whose name stands on the contract my uncle drew up 18 months ago." Charlotte made a small, wounded sound. It escaped before she could catch it. The sound of a creature who has been struck in a place that was already bruised. "No," he said, quickly, low, as though she had reached toward a wound. "Hear me. I am not angry that you came. I am angry that it took me 4 days to know it, because that is 4 days I could have spent understanding that my entire arrangement with your family is void. My contract was with Evelyn. Evelyn is married. The contract is Ash." "Yes." "Then there is no contract. There is only you and me, and a ball I gave in a room full of candles, and a morning on a mountain road, and whatever the next thing is we decide to do." He did not cross the fence. He did not reach for her. He stood on his side of the paddock rail with his hands on the wood, white-knuckled, and he waited. A wind moved up the valley. It was warm for so early in the morning. It lifted the loose curl of hair at her temple and laid it back against the powdered cut above her brow, and the small domestic pressure of that wind, quieter than anything else about the conversation, was what finally undid her. "Your Grace." "Charlotte, I cannot stay here." "Why not?" "I came to buy my sister a week. My presence here is a deception that will reach London by month's end. Every servant in this house is going to know by breakfast. Your uncle is going to hear. My parents are going to hear. Evelyn's parish is going to hear." "Yes." "And your name?" "My name," he said, "is my own. It has been for 6 years. My uncle does not run this house. I do. The servants of this house are already more loyal to you than they have ever been to an absent, half-imaginary Lady Evelyn they were told to expect. Mrs. Halloway asked me this morning whether I intended to marry you before or after the midsummer fete. She did not ask me about Evelyn. She asked me about you." "She does not know I am—" "She has known since the 2nd day. She was my nurse, Charlotte. She knew before I did." A laugh, half sob, half startled, broke out of her. She covered her face with one hand. "I cannot," she said. "I cannot stay and have you decide this. Not in an hour. Not after I have lied to you for 4 days. You need time, Your Grace. You need time away from me to understand what has happened." "I have had time." 4 days. 4 days in which I have made no decision that I did not examine from 4 directions. 4 days in which I have watched you work. I have a lifetime to come, Charlotte. I do not intend to spend it wondering whether I should have spoken sooner." She looked up. Her eyes met his across the fence. "I am going to ask you," he said, "to come back to the house. Not to decide anything, not today. I'm going to send for your parents. I'm going to send for your sister's husband, because I owe them both a direct meeting. And you are going to stay in the gold room until your hands stop shaking and your head stops ringing. And then you and I are going to talk about what the next thing is we decide to do. Is that acceptable? I do not know. His hands loosened on the rail. He did not cross the fence. He did not step toward her. He only stood there, in the early light, with his plain brown coat and his dark, unfashionable hair, and looked at her with the grave attention he had given the stable boy on the mountain road. Then answer me one question. What? Do you want to leave? She looked at him. She thought about her borrowed horse. She thought about the scaffolding on the east wing. She thought about the four-poster in the gold room, and the cook's hot bread, and the way he had looked at her across the bluebells and said, I have been looking for a woman who could pull a shaft off a stable boy. No, she said. Then come back to the house. She came back to the house. The walk back to the house, through a valley gone suddenly sharper in its colors, took them nearly an hour, because neither of them spoke. Charlotte led her 2-year-old at a walk beside Patrick's Bay. The morning had warmed. A woodpecker drummed somewhere on the far slope. A skylark climbed and sang and dropped, climbed and sang and dropped, a small brown metronome for a conversation neither of them was ready to continue out loud. Charlotte's hand on the rein did not tremble now. Her breath came long and even. Somewhere between the paddock gate and the courtyard, she became conscious that she had crossed a line she could not uncross, and that no one she had crossed it with intended to ask her to go back. The gold room received her like a convalescent. Mrs. Halloway had anticipated, perhaps, more of her tears than actually arrived. She brought weak tea and strong bread and a flannel for Charlotte's face, and said very little, which was the kindest possible form of speech. Charlotte slept for 2 hours on top of the bedclothes without undressing, her boots side by side on the rug, and woke into an afternoon light that had already begun to lengthen across the gallery floor outside her door. A small white envelope waited on the writing desk in her own hand, Evelyn's hand, rather, but close enough that she could read it upside down. My dearest sister, the vicar here has been kinder than I deserved. She put the letter face down. She went downstairs. Patrick was in the study with his steward, the study door half open, his voice steady through the crack. When he saw her at the threshold, he excused the steward mid-sentence and stood up. She did not come in. She stood at the door in her ruined riding habit and said, without preamble, that she had slept, and that she was ready to do whatever was needed in the matter of parents and vicars and the scandal to come, and that she would prefer to begin that afternoon if he was willing. He was willing. He sent 3 messengers before sunset, 1 to her father's estate, 1 to the Linton parish, 1 to the solicitor in town. Then he closed the study door and brought her into the garden, and they walked along the yew hedges until the light failed, and he did not ask her a single question about her sister, or the letter, or what she intended to do next. He asked her about the south pasture drainage. It was, Charlotte would reflect later, the most romantic afternoon of her life. The parents came. The vicar came. The scandal, as promised, broke. It broke first in Bath, where an acquaintance of Charlotte's mother had been present at the ball and had, in the intervening week, compared her memory of Lady Evelyn against a miniature of Lady Evelyn painted the previous summer. The miniature showed a softer face, a face that had never, in its life, pulled a shaft off a stable boy. The acquaintance, who was not cruel, but was incurably observant, wrote to a cousin, who wrote to a cousin, who wrote to a gossip sheet, and by the time the Duke of Ashmir's carriage was crossing the Bluebell Bridge with Charlotte's mother inside it, the Bath Chronicle was already printing a delicate inquiry as to whether there were, in fact, 2 Miss Merritts, and if so, which one had attended the Ashmir ball. Lord Peveril, who had expected to inherit Ashmir's political influence by marrying a Merritt cousin of his own, heard the rumour on a Tuesday, and by Thursday had invited himself to the regional spring fete, at which, traditionally, Ashmir hosted half the county. The Duke welcomed Lord Peveril. Charlotte did not ask him to. The breakfast room on the morning of the fete was quiet, in the way the house had learned to be quiet around her. Staff moving at a softer register, the hall clock dampened for reasons no one had announced. Charlotte sat at the long table with a plate of bread she had not touched. Her own ring, with its lark, sat beside the teacup. She had given back the borrowed name. The lark was all she wore now. Ashmir said, over his coffee, that Peveril was coming to make a public display. Charlotte agreed. She had expected as much for 48 hours. A muscle worked once at his jaw, and then he set out, flatly, what Peveril intended. To walk into the long gallery with his cousin on his arm and announce to the room that Ashmir had been imposed upon by a trick, that the engagement was broken, that the ducal reputation was suspect, and that, conveniently, his own cousin was available as an alternative. Charlotte inclined her head. She had worked out the same line of attack in the bath the night before. What she had not expected was his next sentence, delivered quietly to the rim of his cup. She was not to be present. Charlotte set down her teacup. The china clicked against the saucer with a precision that gave her 3 whole seconds to choose her answer. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace." "Patrick," he said. It was the first time he had given her his name. He said it without flourish, as though handing her a tool she would need. "And I said, you are not to be present. I will handle Peveril. You have had a hard week. There is no benefit to you being in that gallery when he makes his move." She tried the name on her tongue. It tasted strange and right, like salt in tea. "Patrick." He looked up. "I am going to be in that gallery." He set his coffee cup down, slowly, with the same precision she had used on her teacup. His mouth opened on her name. She could see the shape of it, and then closed again. "I am going to be in that gallery in Ashmir emerald. Not the one Evelyn lent me. I had a seamstress alter an older one overnight. I am going to stand beside you on the dais when Lord Peveril makes his public display. And when he finishes, I am going to answer him myself." He shook his head once. "That is not necessary." The pulse in her throat had gone hard and even. She had not felt like this since the mountain road. She turned the lark ring on her finger once, then left it. "It is necessary because every other time a man in that room has spoken for me, he has spoken a name that wasn't mine. You will not defend me this afternoon. You will stand beside me and let me defend myself, and then, if you still wish it, you may do whatever it is you intend to do after." A long silence. Outside the window, a robin began a phrase that it did not finish. The clock on the mantel struck the half-hour in a single soft note. "You are," Patrick said, "the most difficult woman I have ever met. I find I admire that very much." A beat. "I will stand beside you." Her hand, without permission, reached across the table. His met it halfway. The lark ring turned once under his thumb, and she understood, with the same clarity she had felt at the coach crash, the ball, the paddock, that she had found the man who would not flinch when she drew a line. "Thank you," she said, low. The long gallery of Ashmir filled at 3 o'clock, with every landed family in 4 counties. Hawthorn had been brought indoors by the armful and banked along the window seats until the whole room smelled of a mountain afternoon. The mirrors along one wall had been polished. The quartet that had played at the ball was playing again, more quietly, under the gallery arch. Charlotte entered on Patrick's arm in a gown the colour of new leaves, pale, clear green that was not Ashmir and not Merritt and not Evelyn and not anyone's colour but her own. She had asked for it that way. He had permitted it. Lord Peveril came. His cousin came. A small train of fashionable gossip came with them. Patrick let Peveril make his opening speech. He gave the man rope, a generous length of it, more than Charlotte would have given him, as she silently noted, and watched him wind it slowly around himself. Peveril began with the impostor. Peveril moved to the compromised reputation. Peveril pivoted to the void contract and to the preservation of family honor, and finally, with an oily flourish, introduced his cousin Cecilia Peveril, who he felt certain his Grace would find a more suitable arrangement. Patrick did not answer. Charlotte stepped forward. The gallery fell silent in a new way, the way it had fallen silent at the ball. Only this time, Charlotte was the one speaking, not being looked at. Her voice, when it came, was the voice she had used to the stable boy on the mountain road. Low, calm, entirely certain of itself. She named him. He named her back. Miss Merritt, with the emphasis a duelist gives a weapon before using it. And the gallery heard the correction to Miss and shifted collectively, as if a great weight had been moved on a pulley. Then Charlotte said, clearly enough for the farthest window seat to hear, he had called her an impostor, and that was accurate. She had attended the Ashmir ball in her sister's name. She had worn her sister's gown. She had used her sister's card. A susurrus of shock. I did so, Charlotte continued, because my sister had, the previous morning, married the man she loved, a vicar in the Linton parish, to whom she had been secretly affianced for 9 months, with my family's quiet consent, once it became clear that she could not bring herself to accept the arrangement my uncle had pressed upon her. My sister asked me to stand in her place for the one evening of the ball, in order to prevent what you have now succeeded in creating, a public scandal at Ashmir's expense. I did not expect to be recognized. I did not expect to be caught. You deceived. I deceived the assembled company, yes. I did not deceive the Duke of Ashmir. His Grace identified me within the first hour. He permitted the fiction because, having met me before the ball in the course of a roadside incident in which I happened to save his stable boy's life, he wished to understand what a woman willing to stand in for her sister's elopement might do next. For 4 days, I was Miss Charlotte Merritt, pretending to be Lady Evelyn Merritt in the presence of a duke who knew exactly who I was. We have not lied to each other, my lord. I have lied to you, and to the Bath Chronicle, and to everyone in this room who assumed that the tall, dishevelled young woman at the Ashmir ball was the softer, gentler twin. Miss Merritt, this is— I am not finished. Lord Peveril, a man who had rarely been told so by a woman in a public room, went white. My sister, Charlotte continued, is married to a man she loves, in a parish that has accepted her. The contract that was purported to exist between my family and the House of Ashmir was drawn up 18 months ago by parties who did not consult the bride. That contract is ash. His Grace and I are under no obligation to one another. Therefore, Lord Peveril, I must inform you that any alternative you propose, however charming your cousin may be, and I am sure she is irrelevant. The Duke of Ashmir does not require an alternative. He has not, at any point in the past week, behaved like a man who required one. He has been courting me, with his eyes wide open, in full possession of my name, from the moment he recognized hawthorn petals on my hem. A ripple of laughter, startled, warm, broke across the gallery. You would do better, my lord, Charlotte said, to take your cousin home and consider whether her interests are best served by being flung into a public room to rescue a proposal no one has asked for. She turned to Cecilia Peveril, a pretty, bright-eyed young woman who, Charlotte saw clearly, had been dragged into this and was hating every second of it. She softened her voice. I mean you no insult, Miss Peveril. You have been used this afternoon. I suspect you know it. Cecilia Peveril, to the astonishment of her cousin and the delight of the assembled county, dropped a small, deliberate curtsy and said, Thank you, Miss Merritt. The quartet, which had been stunned into silence, began, very carefully, to play again. Lord Peveril left. His cousin did not leave with him. She was absorbed, by the end of the afternoon, into a conversation with two of Charlotte's cousins about riding. The Bath Chronicle's correspondent, who had been present and had been taking notes, revised his article that evening into a piece that the following week's edition headlined, "Ashmir does not require an alternative." Charlotte sat down, at some point after Peveril's departure, in a window seat banked with hawthorn. Her hands had begun, belatedly, to shake. She pressed them flat against the cool stone of the windowsill and watched the tremor travel up her wrists and subside. A valley breeze came through the open casement, smelling of cut hay and the first roses. A single late hawthorn petal from the banked sprays on the sill lifted, turned once in the air, and settled on the emerald silk of her lap. She did not brush it off. Patrick found her there. The gallery behind him was emptying in small clusters, guests making their farewells, the quartet closing their cases, a footman extinguishing candles along the mirrored wall. He crossed to her quietly. The soft tread of his riding boots on the parquet was a sound she realized she could already identify out of any other she might hear in this house. Charlotte. Patrick. Marry me. A small, silent beat. She did not look up immediately. She watched the hawthorn petal in her lap instead, and the long line of his shadow crossing her. You have not asked me properly. Have I not? No. You have said, marry me. That is a sentence, not a proposal. He lowered himself onto the window seat beside her, and his shoulder brushed hers. In the polished mirror opposite them, Charlotte saw a tall man in black and a woman in green, and for the first time in a week, the reflection was not dressed in anyone else's name. He was silent long enough that she had time to watch a bee find the hawthorn on the window seat, decide it was not the real flower, and drone away disappointed into the gallery. Charlotte Merritt. She did not look at him. She could hear, in the quality of his breath, that he had assembled his sentence before he opened his mouth, and would not waste it. Patrick. I have spent a week learning that I would have been bored to tears by your sister. I have spent a week learning that I would be, and am, already, entirely unbored by you. I have never proposed to anyone before. I am going to be very bad at this. I ask that you allow me one attempt, and not require me to repeat the performance. She folded her hands in her lap. I will listen. I want you to marry me. Not because your family made a contract, not because a ballroom full of people will be disappointed if you do not, but because I cannot see the rest of my life without you in it. I will not be able to run this estate without the woman who fired my head groom. I will not be able to host a single dinner in this gallery without looking for the woman in green silk who crossed the room in it. I will not be able to ride up the valley road without remembering the morning I pulled a shaft off my own stable boy and realized, before I knew your name, that you were the one. She did not look at him. She was watching the mirror. Those are your reasons, she said. Those are my reasons. What do you ask of me? I ask that you come to live here, that you manage the South stables, that you correct me in public when I am wrong, and in private when I am worse than wrong. I ask that you be my wife in name, and my partner in fact. And I ask, his voice went quiet, I ask that you let me love you, openly, without qualification. That is not a question, Patrick. No. It is a proposal. She turned to him. In the mirror, in the long gallery, in the polished brass of the new chandelier, two figures moved together. A tall, dark-haired man bending his head to a tall, dark-haired woman in green. Charlotte took his hand. His thumb brushed the callus on the inside of her little finger, the one that came from years of long rains in bad weather, and she felt him register it, and set it alongside every other small truth of her he had catalogued in a week. Yes, she said. On one condition. Name it. We do not have the wedding here. We have it at my father's stables. I want to be married where I learned to ride. Yes. And you will wear a green coat. I refuse to be the only one. He laughed. The first real laugh she had heard out of him, startled and warm and echoing under the gallery's great arched ceiling. Heads along the emptying gallery turned toward the sound, with the same small collective gasp she had heard when she had first entered the ball. The Duke of Ashmir, apparently, did not laugh in public. Until this afternoon. Charlotte leaned in close under the cover of the laughter, so close that her forehead nearly touched his. Patrick. Yes. I love you. A silence. His hand moved, very slowly, very carefully, and cupped the side of her face, the way he had handled the mare on the mountain road. Yes, he said. I have been waiting all week for you to say so. You have not said it. Not out loud. I have said it in every other way available to a reasonable man. But since you insist. He touched her temple, where the cut was almost healed. His thumb traced the faint line of the scar it would leave. I love you, Charlotte Merritt. I loved you on the mountain road before I knew your name, and I have loved you every hour since. The quartet played on. The hawthorn, banked along the windows, released its last handful of petals into a spring breeze that had come in through an open casement. A petal caught on Charlotte's hem. He brushed it off. That is how I knew you, he said. I remember. I do not intend to forget. The wedding happened at Merritt Hall in the first week of June. The bride wore green. The groom wore green. Charlotte's father, who had made his peace with the scandal the moment his daughter walked into his drawing room looking, he confided to his wife that night, more like a duchess than any paid-for duchess of the season, gave her away under an arch of hawthorn, cut that morning from the hedgerow behind the stables. The vicar, Evelyn's vicar, performed the ceremony with a tremor in his voice, and Evelyn beside him, radiant and terrified, and already visibly loved. Cecilia Peveril came, uninvited and cheerfully unapologetic, with a small gift of her own making, and a letter from her aunt, in which her aunt said several things about Lord Peveril that Cecilia had underlined twice. Mrs. Halloway, who had been promoted in all but name to housekeeper-in-chief, wept openly and denied it afterward. Tom, the stable boy, recovered and taller than he had been in April, held the bay horse's head during the ceremony and did not smile once, because he was 15, and this was important. There was no public ball afterward. Charlotte had refused one on principle. There was a dinner at Merritt Hall for 32 people, the precise number her mother had said could be managed without the cook developing an opinion. And after the dinner, Patrick took her by the hand and led her out to the home stables where she had learned to ride. And they stood in the dim aisle in their fine wedding clothes and listened to the horses settling for the night. And he did not speak, and neither did she. And that was how they knew they were going to be all right. They returned to Ashmir at midsummer. The house, which had been under scaffolding on the east wing when Charlotte first saw it, had shed 3/4 of that scaffolding by the end of their first fortnight home. The south stables, cleaned out, rethatched, rebedded, remanned under Margaret's brisk direction, became Charlotte's daily work. She rode out every morning before breakfast. She rode up the valley to the place where a coach had cracked sideways in spring, and she stopped her horse each time at the hawthorn gap. The hawthorn did not flower again until the following year, of course. She did not need it to. The memory of it sat in the hedgerow, like a promise the earth had made, and intended to keep. 4 months later, Ashmir sat in a midsummer dusk that was the longest, greenest dusk the valley had seen in a decade. The hawthorn was long past. The hedgerows were heavy with dog roses and the first yellow mustard. The south stables were full. The head groom was a cheerful woman named Margaret, hired on Charlotte's recommendation, who could read a feed ledger at 6 paces, and who had already identified 2 more instances of casual pilferage in the outer tack room, both corrected within a day. Charlotte came down from the paddock at the end of the afternoon, hair in a plait, a smear of hay dust down one cheek, wearing an old blue riding habit that had belonged to her mother. Patrick was on the forecourt, talking to a foreman about the new east wing roof. He saw her coming and excused himself mid-sentence, and the foreman, who had, in 4 months, grown accustomed to being excused mid-sentence whenever the new Duchess walked into view, simply nodded and went back to his ledgers. He met her at the door. "You are late." "I had a mare to settle." "You always have a mare to settle." "Yes." He looked at her. In 4 months, Charlotte had grown into the gallery and the mirrors and the long stone corridors in a way that no outsider would now question. She was, to the staff, to the valley, to the tenants, to the household. She was her Grace. To Patrick, in private, she was still Charlotte. She preferred it that way. "There is a letter from your sister," he said. "Oh?" "She is increasing. She asks whether we would stand godparents." Charlotte laughed, a small, private laugh, warmer than the laugh Evelyn had copied from her. "Tell her yes." "Already written." "You know my hand too well." "I know you too well." "Patrick." "Yes." She took his hand. They walked, slowly, through the forecourt and into the east garden, where the roses, new this year, were only just coming into bud, and where, half hidden by a young hawthorn planted the week of their wedding, a small iron bench waited. They sat. He put his arm along the back of the bench. Her head found his shoulder. From where they sat, they could see the long valley, the bluebell slope already gone to green summer, the distant pale scar of the mountain road where, on the morning in hawthorn season, a coach had cracked sideways and a woman in a ruined gown had pulled a shaft off a stable boy. "Patrick." Do you remember what you thought that afternoon in the paddock, when I told you I was not Evelyn?" "I thought, finally." "Truly?" "Truly. I thought, here is the moment. She is going to tell me, and whatever she tells me, I am not giving her back." The hawthorn, young and thin-stemmed, moved in a small wind. A single late petal came loose and drifted down and landed, entirely without ceremony, on the cuff of Charlotte's old blue riding habit. She looked down at it. He covered it very gently with his hand. "That is how I knew you," he said. "Yes," she said. "I remember." And she did not brush it off. If this story found a place with you, if Charlotte's ride down the mountain road, or her green gown on the dais, or Patrick's hand on that single hawthorn petal, if any of it stayed with you, tell me in the comments which line landed hardest. I read every one. Subscribe for the next story, because Ashmir has neighbours, and Cecilia Peverell is going to turn out to have a story of her own. Sleep well.